Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome everybody to Season 2, Episode 58 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout Week 12 and the rest of the 2022 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Cap. Coming off Week 11, Nick, how'd we do in those fantasy leagues?
Just get to the news.
Just get to the news.
Get to the news.
How'd you do in the fantasy leagues? You got to talk about the fantasy leagues.
I'm going to luck into a few wins. I think I'm gonna have 2 wins in leagues where I'm gonna score sub 110.
Okay.
So that's thankful. I think I'm going 4-1 on the week.
Okay.
But
it's not too bad.
This is more important than my fantasy teams. And
you know what? I give you credit for wearing it with pride at the moment. All right. If this is your first time listening to us, thank you so much. If you joined our Sunday show yesterday or live at 8:30, and this is your first time, joining the weekly show, we appreciate that. Thank you and welcome to the show. We do the show on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. This is our Monday show. On the Monday show, we give you the news from Sunday. Sometimes there's more, sometimes there's less. But then we go game by game to give you our biggest fantasy takeaway from each game. And then we end the show with a Monday Night Football preview, giving you projections, over-unders for each star player that can be involved in that game. This is our Monday show, and hopefully you enjoy it. If you're listening on an audio streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Anchor, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. If you'd rather watch and listen to the show, go to our YouTube channel, PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast. First, hit that subscribe button. We'd appreciate that. Then drop a like on any video that you're watching. If you're watching this video, make sure you drop a like on it. We'd appreciate that. Aside from that, please follow us and interact with us on social media, PrimeTimeFFPod on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Then PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast on Facebook and YouTube. Alrighty, getting to the injury updates and the news. Let's start off with, let's see, which injury is the most serious. I think it's going to be Kyle Pitts. He has a knee injury. The early reports that he's avoided a ligament tear, but there is a worry of an ACL, PCL, MCL. The worry about everything. Don't have any major update on this. Probably going to have to wait until Monday or later on Monday, I guess, for that one. But, Nick, my gut reaction as a Kyle Pitts owner, I think you have him as well, is if he's hurt, I kind of feel like I'm being saved to where I don't have to play him for his potential, and I can kind of just play somebody that's a higher upside on a week-to-week basis, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fair. I agree with that.
Yeah. I don't want to root for an injury. He's super duper talented. Mariota is clearly isn't the quarterback that's going to, fit Kyle Pitts' skill set. And I'll talk about this later on in the show. Look what Jacoby Brissett's doing with Cleveland. Look at what, Matt Ryan's doing with the Colts. Look at what Carson Wentz did over there in Washington. I don't think teams should really reach for quarterbacks at this point. Even Jared Goff with the Lions. If you're not confident in a quarterback, don't reach at the draft. And I just feel like there's other quarterbacks that next year could help this Falcons offense out, and definitely Kyle Pitts out. So I think he's definitely a bust for the year. And aside from that, we'll just see what happens.
I like your quarterback thing, and I know this is a fantasy podcast, but I mean, you could go back in the history of the NFL. Look at all the top quarterbacks. None of them were drafted as the first overall in their class. I mean,
it's very rare. It's very rare.
You could look at the top 10 quarterbacks in the league. None of them were the first drafted in their class, except maybe Kyler Murray, and he's a fringe top 10 at best. So,
yeah,
it's crazy how the numbers are for that.
Yep. All right, some other injuries that we're going to note here. Let's go to Wan'Dale Robinson, not a huge name, but did a knee injury. He was in crutches after the game. It does seem serious. The initial reports are he post something on his Instagram story of a picture of him with a little frowny face. So that does unfortunately look serious. He never was able to get going. The Giants are almost like a Walmart Chargers in the sense that they're always injured, especially the receivers. So that's a shame. I don't know if any thoughts on that, but I figured not too many.
No, I mean, it sucks. He wasn't too fantasy relevant. I mean, he should be cut from most teams by now anyway, but this team can't stay healthy at receiver. I think they are the new favorites, by the way, to land Odell Beckham. So I think that'll be a topic on the waiver segment.
Yep. All right, moving on. Justin Fields has a left shoulder injury. He was carted off after the game. The injury came in the first play of the last drive. Fields described it as pretty bad pain, but he's not in a sling or anything like that. I'm 99% sure he's a righty, so I'm not sure how much this is actually going to affect him, but we kind of just got to wait out the week and see what happens with Justin Fields. But this could be a real bummer because I think he had another really good game today. And I'm pretty sure in the last 6 weeks he's been like a top 3 fantasy quarterback. So this could be a pretty big bummer for you guys out there that have Justin Fields. Yep. Joe Mixon had a concussion. He was ruled out in the third quarter. Samaje Perine looked excellent, but monitor that one. They're not playing on Thanksgiving, so I think he could clear concussion protocol by Sunday. But again, see what happens. And Matthew Stafford looks like he has his second concussion in the last 2 weeks. It's happened in the third quarter. He's not in concussion protocol yet. He's waiting until they get back to Los Angeles, and then they're going to actually evaluate that and then put him in concussion protocol. But the Rams look dead in the water. We'll talk about it in a few minutes, but they look dead. So yeah, we'll talk about it. Any other injuries you want to talk about or anything else you want to say before we move on?
No, we're good.
All right. Oops. Wrong ticker. There we go. Wrong ticker again. Those are for people watching on YouTube. Okay. Weekend wrap. Let's talk about each game. Let's give our biggest fantasy takeaway from each game. So, Nick, Chicago Bears at the Atlanta Falcons. My Bears. I have a bet on the Bears, and they did not win. That sucks. The Texans lost, so that's okay. What is your biggest takeaway from the Bears and Falcons?
I didn't think I learned anything about either of these teams. I mean, Atlanta's the same exact team I knew. You can't trust any of the receivers. I did see Drake London should have had a touchdown at one point in the game, which would have given him a good week. But outside of that, it did not look good all around for the Falcons offense. It did not look good for the Bears, even though the Bears had some more fantasy relevant players. The biggest thing was that David Montgomery, without Khalil Herbert, had his most carries that he's had the entire season. So it does look like they're going to trust him and not put in like another committee back there for the time Herbert's out. So for the David Montgomery owners that think they got the league winner for the championship weeks, like they're not showing any signs of eating into his workload from backup running back. So I think you're good to go there.
The bigger worry is Justin Fields eating into his workload. I think he had 80 yards on the ground today, so that's the bigger worry.
He's on pace to break Lamar's record.
Yeah. My big takeaway is that the Bears are the Falcons, but better, right? They're a running team. They don't throw the ball a lot. There's not a lot of targets to go around. And the running backs on the Bears, I think, are more complete. If you have Khalil Herbert healthy, I think Montgomery and Herbert are better than Algier and Cordell Patterson. The quarterback's a major upgrade. I think the offensive lines are kind of the same. Maybe Chicago's is a bit worse. The skill positions are, I guess, kind of the same. Mooney and Kmet and Kyle Pitts and London, who had a touchdown today. He's still alive, apparently. But my point being, they're kind of just the same team. And what I've learned from the Bears is that I think that Kmet and Mooney are fringe starters every week, but they're not guaranteed. I think their floor is very low, right? They're not both going to boom every week. So the floor is low, but I think whichever one does boom is going to have a pretty nice game. I think Darnell Mooney had 13 or 15 fantasy points or something, which is that's a nice flex play for your last flex play. So that's my takeaway, at least. Cleveland Browns versus the Buffalo Bills. This started out in a way I didn't think it would. What's your big takeaway from this one?
I'll let you give your top takeaway because then I think we got to have a discussion about the next one.
Sure. Which one do you think is my top one? The first one?
Yeah, the first one listed.
So my big takeaway is that Devin Singletary's been solid. Last 2 weeks, he's had back-to-back weeks with 17 fantasy points. He's had touchdowns in each of them. In his last 5 games, he's had over 65 yards in 3 of them, over 45 yards in 4 of them. He has 3 touchdowns. He's had over 14 fantasy points in 3 out of his last 5. So I think he's a fringe starter. But then there's James Cook, right up behind him, who had a little bit less carries, but the same number of yards. Did not get many receptions, though. So watch the backfield, but I think Singletary is, if you need a running back, the trade deadline's over for most leagues. So if you have Devin Singletary, I think he's a guy you can slot in if you have a bye week problem or an injury problem or something like that. I think he's a fine flex play. And that's kind of what I learned, at least. Do you want to mention Gabriel Davis had a good game? Do you want to mention that one?
It was 11 points. I wouldn't call it a good game.
That's fair. Yeah. I thought his stats are a little bit more than that. Diggs did not have
targets were higher than that, but once again, he's like 50% of catching.
Yeah, I don't think Diggs had a the game. I think Diggs only had 12 fantasy
points. He had 4 for 48 and a touchdown. So
yeah, and Allen didn't have a good game either. They didn't. The Bills look kind of flat right now. I don't know if they peaked too early, but they look flat. They need to find a way to.
I think they're going through Kansas City's 6-week struggle. Like Kansas City has 6 games a year where just everything doesn't click and then they get it together. Like I think
it's tough to stay hot the entire season for any team.
Yeah, exactly.
The Eagles are kind of going through it as well. So if you want to take that next point, if you have another point, that's totally okay as well.
No, yeah, let's just talk about it. Next week is not Deshaun Watson's return. It's 2 weeks from now.
It's 2 weeks? Okay, so my note doesn't even matter at that point. That's a dumb note by me then.
But
so I'll let you guys know that the note was Browns players have been productive, but what changes next week? Thinking that Deshaun Watson came back in week 12, but Nick corrected me that it's actually week 13. They have the Bucs next week, who are a pretty tough defense coming off the bye. I'm a bigger believer in the Bucs than most people, so I could see the Browns getting slaughtered, but who knows?
I mean, they've been contending a lot more this season than we would have thought. With Brissett at the helm.
Yeah,
I'm very curious. I mean, like all the receivers have been productive. Nick Chubb had his worst game of the day. David Njoku was one of the target leaders at the tight end position. He wasn't number 1, but he wasn't far from it. I have no clue what we're going to see in 2 weeks. And I think a large part of it is because they're constantly playing from behind. So they are able to, it's not really garbage time because they are competing, but like for the course of the game, they're constantly having to pass the ball and they're doing it well. Deshaun Watson hasn't played in 2 years. Is it going to take him 1 week against Houston to get back to Deshaun Watson, who last time we saw him was the 3rd or 4th best quarterback in the NFL, right? Like we said, he was clearly and definitively better than Josh Allen was. And up until this past year, it really wasn't even a debate. So I am super curious to see what happens with these guys. I think it's going to make or break fantasy playoffs, championships. Like it's going to be really good. But these Browns players, I mean, kudos to them because every single one of those guys fell in the draft and every single one has delivered on their ADP.
Yeah, and that's the big thing you just mentioned, right there is that it will affect the fantasy playoffs because I'm in a dynasty league where I have Amari Cooper. I didn't plan on starting Cooper like at all this season until Watson came back. He's been a real solid start for me, each week. And if I do win this week, it is going to be a tight one. I'll be 7-4 and 3rd in points, and that's pretty solid for my team that I don't think is as good as some of the others. And Cooper's been a big part of that. And some other teams out there, Nick Chubb's been a top 2-3 running back. Donovan Peoples-Jones. I think he has 6 straight weeks with over double-digit fantasy points. Before the injury, Njoku had like 3 or 4 weeks with, I think, double digits. So I think you're right. Watson comes back week 13, fantasy playoffs start week 15. So I think those 2 weeks will tell us a lot about who you could actually trust in the playoffs, and that's going to be a really tricky situation for managers to kind of navigate.
Yeah.
All right, Philadelphia Eagles at the Indianapolis Colts. Jeff Saturday's got these boys buzzing, apparently. What's your biggest takeaway from this one?
I am terrified if I'm going up against that Colts defense with any fantasy team. I mean, the Eagles just went up against them. They've been dominating every single team so far from an offensive perspective, and most of those players had some of their worst games of the season. I mean, A.J. Brown had one of his worst games. Devontae Smith looked good. Jalen Hurts played well for fantasy, but he didn't hit his projection. I think he's hit his projection in all but 2 weeks this season. So, for these guys, I mean, the Colts defense is scary, and that was against probably a top 5 offense in the NFL. That division is very easy from a defensive perspective. You got the Titans in there, the Jaguars, and the Texans. I mean, I'm not trusting any of those guys up against them. The Colts have one of the best defenses in the league, and my God, these guys are firing on all cylinders under Saturday.
So I wish I knew why Matt Ryan wasn't starting originally. I don't know if it was like a manager. I don't know whose decision it was. I don't want to put it all on Frank Wright, but he's clearly the better quarterback for this team. I can't believe they thought Sam Ehlinger would have been the better fit. Jonathan Taylor, though, 22 carries for 84 yards, a touchdown. Also had 3 receptions. This is the Jonathan Taylor that you drafted. I also want to mention Paris Campbell, who I've been pretty high on, 5 receptions for 67 yards on 6 targets. Not a crazy day, a little bit under 12 points, but that's a guy that I think really you want to roster going forward, especially with the playoffs coming up. So, team looks much better with Matt Ryan, and with Saturday there, Jonathan Taylor looks rejuvenated, which is good for Jonathan Taylor owners. The New York Jets versus the New England Patriots. I will let you take this one.
I don't want to talk about this, but I will.
If you want, do you want me to start? I'll start.
What?
I mean, we can start with fantasy or real life.
I ain't talking real life Jets anymore, man. It's so sad. Anyway, First off, both those defense. You just watched the number 1 and number 2 defense. You didn't watch it because it was never on Red Zone, and I'm sure no one was watching a Jets game. But
now here's the thing: I have 3 televisions, and my local CBS. I think it was CBS game was the Jets Pats. I don't know why, but that's the game that I did get. So I did actually
it was a Dolphins relevant game.
Probably that was on my bottom right TV, and then I had the crappy Giants versus the Lions on my bottom left TV.
So you just watched the 2 best defenses in football. I don't think anyone can compete with these 2. I mean, maybe Denver, but that was ridiculous how good they were. No, the Patriots marched down the field a couple times, couldn't deliver in the red zone. Jets never got the ball down the field. My biggest takeaway came from after the game, which is where even Garrett Wilson now is saying things about Zach Wilson and how he's frustrated with the passing game. I don't think they're going to get rid of Wilson before, not Garrett Wilson, Zach Wilson before the end of the season. But I mean, the first 3 weeks of the year, Joe Flacco had nearly 1,000 yards. I know they weren't winning games, but now that the defense is fired up and that team looks good, he might actually be better for this offense because Zach Wilson looks abysmal. They're blaming it on 40-mile-per-hour winds. Like, no, come on, you're missing throws to the flats. Like that, there's no excuse for it. Mac Jones had a near perfect completion percentage on the game, and it was all checkdowns and flats. He was never going over the top against the Jets. Like, you got to be better. And coming off the bye, like, you knew exactly what you were going to see from New England. The offense was prepped so much better for the last few weeks, and it was so abysmal for all those guys. I don't want to play a single Jet. They host Chicago next week, so there's going to be fantasy relevant players on offense for that. But it is going to be a miserable rest of football season for me and fantasy season for those Jets.
I just wrote the game was as expected. Both defenses are pretty great. I wouldn't crown them as 1 and 2, but honestly, because I don't see anything spectacular about any defense in the league right now. And maybe it's just because the top defenses are pretty even, I guess. But I don't know. There's no defense to me that I say, man, that one's the number 1. I see a couple really good defenses. Those 2 are definitely in there, but I don't know. To me, they're just not like. I guess my mind is kind of clouded by the fact that we've seen historically great defenses over the past few years. And this year doesn't seem like there's anybody at that level. So anyway. That's anyway, but yes, these 2 defenses, you don't want to play your fantasy players against them if you can avoid it. With that also said, though, I want to mention this. I don't follow a lot of Jets fans on Twitter. I really don't. But my timeline is filled with Zach Wilson bashing. It's all over my timeline. And I mentioned at the beginning of the show a little bit. There is no reason to keep Zach Wilson or to draft a quarterback when you could get somebody in free agency like a Jacoby Brissett, a Matt Ryan, somebody like that, a journeyman quarterback that could, if Jacoby Brissett is playing for that Jets team today, I mean, I think they win. Matt Ryan, I think they win. The Jets averaged, I saw it on Twitter, 2.7 inches in the second half of offense.
They only had 2 yards.
Yeah. And the thing that I don't like is that, like, Garrett Wilson, that guy is a leader. I saw the comments on Twitter that he was like, we got to take accountability. This is embarrassing, yada, yada, yada. And then there's Zach Wilson and you probably shouldn't ask this question, but a question was asked, do you feel like you let your defense down? And his response was no. Well, 2 weeks ago, Josh Allen said, I put this game on me. I'm the quarterback. I didn't do enough in this game. I don't know. I guess to me, it's just like if you're the quarterback and your offense averaged 2.7 inches, you could have probably said, they had a good game plan. We didn't play well. We got to do better next week. I don't know. I guess to me, it's just like you could have. I know he's in year 2. Is it 2 or 3? 2? I know he's in year 2, but I just feel like there's a better answer than no. I don't know. But anyway, I think the Jets receivers are solid. I think the running backs are solid. I think the offense is solid, but I think the quarterback is something that needs to be.
I genuinely think the entire team is very good. They're way better than anyone thought, but I think they genuinely have a great football roster. And
I think they're better Lions.
So they have the money to spend on a quarterback. I think that they're going to bring it. Like, there was a rumor that they're going to cut Derek Carr after this season. There's rumors that Lamar might walk. Like, Aaron Rodgers, we know, is disgruntled there. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the Jets made a push for that because they can afford to, because most of their roster and all their studs were young and drafted. So I want to see it. I want to see that for the Jets team because I think that they can contend in that division and they cannot with Zach Wilson.
Yeah, I think so too. But that division is really tough.
Loaded.
It is really tough. Anyway, so that's that talk. The Los Angeles Rams against the New Orleans Saints. Do you want to talk first? At any point you want to hammer home?
There's just one, and there was one big takeaway I had. Taysom Hill took a lot of reps at quarterback today. They said that they wanted to do this going into the week, and we didn't know if it was going to be a couple reps, like it would be his usual running plays. No, he was passing the ball like a quarterback does. I think he played double-digit snaps at quarterback. So going forward, if this is going to be the trend, and the offense did look better when they were rotating the two because it was different looks on every play, Taysom Hill's going to have to be a must-start at tight end because you're playing a quarterback at tight end. It's like you pretty much get a super flex in your tight end position, regardless of how good he is. I don't care if it were Ryan Tannehill. If Ryan Tannehill were listed as a tight end, he would be a must-start every single week just because you play your quarterbacks. Like, it's non-negotiable.
So my big takeaway is the Rams, like, again, I've been a believer in, like, the Rams, the Packers, and the Bucks. I'm like, they're going to turn it around at some point. The Rams, they're bad. They're a bad football team. I'm done with them. With that said, there's no Ram. I think you should drop every Ram right now. You had a note here that Allen Robinson didn't see any more targets, which is true. Scarborough didn't receive any major workload. Stafford went out with a concussion. The running game still looks horrendous. K-Makers look better, but, it all looks bad. And they lost today to a Saints team that's only won 2 games. So they have Seattle twice. They're going to have the 49. Oh, no, they played the 49. So they'll have the Cardinals again. So with that said, I don't think Cooper Kupp comes back this season. So I think all your Rams are droppable at this point. I think they're just a team that's going to have a pretty high draft pick. I think it's going to somebody else. I don't know what team is getting that pick, but it's not going to be the Rams pick.
I think it's the Lions.
Yeah, it could be the Lions, or it could be whatever the Ramsey trade was. I don't know. They traded all their picks away. All right, speaking of the Lions, the Detroit Lions against the New York Giants, the only game I flipped in my spread pool today. And
sorry.
No. You and Cody, former co-host Cody, both told me to change 3 different picks. But Cody was set on the Vikings, and I said the Cowboys are going to win that one. So I did stand firm on that. But I did believe in the Giants covering this one, so it is my choice ultimately, but it's just funny that that's the one that I flipped. Your big takeaway from this one?
This was such a weird game. The Lions offense has not been as good in the last few weeks, and they put up their best game of the season against the Giants, who have had a top 5, top 7 defense in the league up to this point of the year. Barkley, in what you would have expected to be his best game of the year, going up against the Lions, just like every running back seems to do, winded up being his worst game of the season. I think it's just a one-off. Don't panic. Like it was such a weird week for this whole game. My most important takeaway is Darius Slayton had 10 targets. And this is now 4 straight games where he's had over 11 fantasy points. This includes before and after the bye. So he had the bye week in between. And now without Wan'Dale Robinson, he's clearly going to be the wide receiver 1 far and away on that team. I think he has to be rostered. I think he has to be played in some of these more favorable matchups like the Lions. And lastly, I said start Daniel Jones. I was wrong on a lot of my boom and bust, so I'm going to pat myself on the back here because I deserve to take one of these away.
Yeah.
I said he'll have his most yards in any game that he's had this season. He had, I think, 400 all-purpose. So way to go, Daniel Jones. Vanilla Vic really backing me up here.
There you go. So here's my takeaway from this one. Jamal Williams is this year's James Conner. Last year, James Conner, 752 yards on the ground, 15 touchdowns, 475 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns, total of 18 touchdowns, total of about 1,300 yards. Jamal Williams this year so far through 11 games. I guess there's 10 games technically since it's week 11, so he still has 6 games left. 668 rushing yards on the ground, 12 touchdowns, 57 receiving yards. He's going to end up close to 20 touchdowns this season, and he might be drafted too high next year. I don't know how that's going to be handled. A lot of variables have to be moved into place, but I wouldn't think too much of it except that he's a goal line vulture, and they love using him on the goal line. That's what I got. I traded Cortland Sutton for him this week, so I needed a third running back in a league where I wasn't going to start Sutton after this week, and I'm pretty happy with that trade. Carolina Panthers versus the Baltimore Ravens. This game stunk. It was never on Red Zone. It stunk. I don't know if you watched Red Zone. I know you're watching your Jets, but it was never on the Red Zone for good reason. And the only note I have here is that Demarcus Robinson went 9 for 128. Could he be a waiver pickup or a one-off? I think it's a one-off, but wanted to note it. And the Panthers are worse with Baker Mayfield. They looked really bad.
Yeah, I mean, you hit all the nails on the head. I think we'll talk a lot more to Marcus Robinson tomorrow because he had 9 targets and 9 catches on it. But I mean, man, like.
But then again, Harbaugh's faced Baker like 6 times in the last few years. So I mean,
and Baker's faced the Ravens 6 times in the last few years. He should have been prepped.
That's true. He lost the shit game against Lamar.
Yes, he did. He
did
did
very well in that game, by the way. That was not a Baker loss. That Browns defense let him down. Baker was excellent in that game. All right, Washington Commanders versus the Houston Texans. What is your bigger takeaway from this one?
Antonio Gibson out-touched Brian Robinson on the entire day. I don't know if he missed any time, Robinson, during this game, but Gibson, once again, like he was earlier in the year, was pretty much used as a 3-down back, and Brian Robinson was not. So Gibson had one of his best fantasy games of the season. I think his best game since week 1. And I don't think he found the end zone. So if Antonio Gibson once again is going to put us on this roller coaster, it's going to be crazy because once again, we know the Texans aren't good against running backs, but once again, he's just delivering fantasy numbers off sheer volume. Like, we're going to wind up having to start him in some weeks, and he's going to deliver in some, but he's such a roller coaster, man. I don't even know how to judge Antonio Gibson anymore because the talent's there. The usage is there once in a while, but I don't get that team.
All right. I think the alarm meter has to be set off on Dameon Pierce at this point. Over the past few weeks, his numbers just keep going down. He had 20 before the bye. Then we have 15, 14, 16, 14, 13. Hasn't had a touchdown in 5 weeks. One of those weeks, he did have 100 yards. In 2 of those, including today, he had under 50 yards. The Texans aren't a good football team. And I think that's a problem that people have kind of negated. They're not a good football team. They don't move the ball down the field. They don't compete in a lot of games unless they're facing a bad team. And they got some tough ones coming up. I mean, they have Miami, who's a really good team. Not a good defense, but a good team. Cleveland can compete. That'll be the Deshaun Watson game. Dallas is a nightmare matchup. Kansas City isn't a good defense. But then in the playoffs, you have Tennessee, week 16. Then if you get through that, Jacksonville's an easy matchup. So I'm just saying this is not a good situation for Dameon Pierce. And as much as we like talent, he's still a 3rd-round talent. And, yeah, so.
I am definitely worried about Pierce, like you said. The only thing that I'm not worried about is the Commanders have been good against running backs. Last week, Miles Sanders put up, I think, 5 points, which was his worst game or second worst game of the season. And that's a team that does get the ball downfield, was playing with a lead. Like, the Texans went down big. They couldn't get back. They were passing the ball a lot more. He couldn't get it going on the ground. But this is his first game under 14 points since week 3 when he took over as the official starter. So I'm not hitting the panic alarm yet, but I am definitely a little worried with that schedule.
Okay, I agree. All right, 4:00 games. Las Vegas Raiders versus the Denver Broncos. Let's ride, baby. We're riding to a top 10 pick for my Seahawks. Another loss for the Broncos. Oh, man, it's bad. It's so bad. It's funny to watch, though. And you know what? Mr. McDaniels, you gave Josh Jacobs 20 carries. He had over 100 yards, and you won the football game. Next week, please do not give Josh Jacobs 20 carries. I want you to lose the football game. But anyway, yeah, I was happy with the Raiders today. And Devontae Adams had an awesome, awesome day. Great receiver.
Yeah, there's another great receiver on the other side of the ball, but it didn't translate to fantasy as well.
That's because Mr. Russell Wilson is a bum.
He's Mr. Limited.
He's Mr. Limited. He is limited.
So here is Russell Wilson's rest of season schedule. Not Russell Wilson. Well, I guess it's the Broncos. But here's Courtland Sutton's rest of season schedule because I think he's going to be very good down the stretch. I've been high on him. I've been pounding the drum all year. I'm not going to stop pounding the drum.
That's fine. I'm just going to have to rebuttal because I have some takes on Mr. Wilson. But let's hear the schedule. Let's hear what we got.
Okay, at Carolina, easy secondary. At Baltimore, a lot of points to Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill in week 2. I know it's not the same offense, but has a lot of points to receivers. Host Kansas City, host Arizona, at Rams, and then host Kansas City or at Kansas City. So we're talking in the next 6 weeks of fantasy football. Courtland Sutton is going to have, if I had to guess, just knowing the matchups and what we've known for this year, not actually checking, it's one of the 5 to 7 easiest rest of season schedules for a receiver. He's clearly the receiver 1 on his team. We don't know Jerry Jeudy's timeable yet, but as long as Cortland Sutton has this type of schedule and he has seen 18 targets over the last 2 weeks, I do think you're going to be forced to throw him out there and play him in these more favorable matchups.
So my rebuttal to that is look at who's throwing him the ball. They just don't score points. And to me, if they're only averaging 1 touchdown a game, like if Sutton doesn't get that touchdown, I just don't see him having a good enough day to justify him starting him in your wide receiver 1 or 2 slot. He's flexible, but I don't know. I like the talent, but they don't score points. And to me, to score fantasy points, you have to score NFL points, and they're just not doing that right now.
I agree with that. I'm going to give one last stat on this game
Sure.
that my brother shared,
Sure.
which was if the Denver Broncos in regulation scored at least 18 points in every game this season, they would currently be 9-1.
That's wonderful, but 18 points only gets you 2 touchdowns. And if Sutton don't get one of those, then he doesn't have a good
100%. I'm saying the stat because
that's a stat for their defense, but that proves the point that Russell Wilson's playing horribly. All this is prove my point.
You know what they need? Well, I will add this last point.
Sure.
They did look a lot better as an offense with Gary Kubiak calling the plays. Like they
I
got the
wouldn't
ball
say
down
a
the field.
lot. I'd say they looked
They've
bit
looked
better.
awful this year, and they looked like an average NFL offense.
Yeah, but
It's
I mean,
a big
they faced a really bad defense and only scored 16 points. To me, it's just like,
well,
I don't know.
Once again, they couldn't deliver. I think that Denver really needs to think about quarterback. They need one of two things. They need a veteran leader like Russell Wilson, or they need someone with a big arm that's kind of frisky like a Drew Lock. And that would have given them enough of an offense. It makes no sense what the hell's going on with these Broncos outside of coaching, in my opinion.
But the fact that Russell Wilson looks as bad still just makes no sense to me. Maybe it was all Pete Carroll. It's the downward trend of Russell Wilson is something that's going to be like a 30 for 30 in 10 years. It's really interesting. It is really interesting to watch. Dallas Cowboys at the Minnesota Vikings. 1 o'clock, Kirk Cousins was not playing clearly. Kirk Thuggins was gone, and they got smushed. It was really, really bad. What was your big takeaway from this one? Because I put some stuff in there that I think is pretty notable, at least. I don't know if you had any other points.
Mine's mostly, you already hit the point on it with the running backs over there in Dallas.
Well, you can talk about it. I have 2 points there, so if you want to talk about it, I mean, you got it.
Sure. Tony Pollard finally got a split role with Ezekiel Elliott, actually more workload with the passing game. And once again, the thing that everybody in sports media has been pounding was true. When Tony Pollard's in the game, that team is way different. And you saw it. 40 points against Minnesota, the Minnesota team that did just beat the Buffalo Bills, the Minnesota team that was 8-1 going into this week. That Cowboys team is a way better with Tony Pollard. And now, I know I said earlier, the Giants are the favorite to land Odell Beckham. The number 2 is the Dallas Cowboys. So that offense is very dynamic already. They probably don't need OBJ. And my God, are they using all these guys? Tony Pollard, 15 carries, 80 yards, 6 receptions, over 100 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns in the air, and then Zeke got his 2 touchdowns on the ground, which gave him a good game. I don't know if Zeke's going to be playable moving forward. I think Tony Pollard, you can lock in your lineup.
Zeke's playable because here's what Mike McCarthy's doing with Jerry Jones, right? Jerry Jones sees Zeke in the end zone and goes, "That's my boy," but it doesn't see on the stat sheet that Tony Pollard is out playing him in every other phase of the game. As long as Zeke gets the goal line looks, this works.
Yep.
Because I feel like Jerry is just he's blind to everything else except for the touchdowns.
Yep.
So anyway, I think it's funny how they're kind of using them. My last point. TJ Hawkinson, 5 receptions on 9 targets. I think he's kind of trending towards must start. I think this is his third game with the Vikings. He's had 9 targets in like all 3 of these games. That's what you want in a tight end. 9 targets means a good shot at like 5-6 receptions. It means a good shot at a touchdown and a good shot at like 50 yards. Not a lot of tight ends you can trust on a week-to-week basis. I think this is becoming one of them at least. I don't think he's on any waiver wires at this point, but I think you can trust him. Last game, Cincinnati Bengals versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Nick, you're talking Bengals, buddy. What do you got?
I'm talking Steelers. Kenny Pickett played his best game of the year, in my opinion. Just off the eye test, I thought his passing was better. His pocket mobility was better. His accuracy was a lot better. The Bengals do have a tough defense, and they didn't manage to put up 30 points in total against them, so good for them. And the guy that I've been saying is a monster, George Pickens, finally had his great fantasy day. 4 catches, 83 yards, and a touchdown. The most yards for any of the receivers over there. He was spectacular. He's everything I thought he would be as a rookie. And I know Pickett just played his best game, and he does have a much easier schedule rest of the season than the first 6 games he had of his career, which was all like Super Bowl contending teams, including this one, the Super Bowl team from last year. So I think Kenny Pickett, I don't know if he has a bright future ahead of him, but I think George Pickens and him will be a solid duo for at least the rest of the season and maybe going into next year.
I don't know what Deontay Johnson's contract situation is, but I would try to unload him if I were them.
They just gave him an extension going into this season.
Never mind. Nick, I got a question for you. You love asking me questions, so I want to ask you a question. Do you know who the quarterback one on the week was? Any chance?
What was it? Vanilla Vic?
It was not Vanilla Vic.
Was it Justin Fields?
No, you named number 3 and number 5. You're missing number 1 and 2 and 3 and 4.
It wasn't Russell Wilson.
No, I have to scroll really far to get to Russell Wilson.
Kenny Pickett.
Kenny Pickett was above Russell Wilson. You're hotter.
What was it? Joe Burrow.
It was Joe Burrow. It was the quarterback 5 on the year. Joe Burrow. Just want to mention that. He's hungover still. I'm just saying that guy stuffs the stat sheet. He's a great fantasy quarterback because he throws picks, but he still stuffs the stat sheet. He's great. Wonderful for fantasy football. And he also runs the ball occasionally on the goal line, which helps. I love busting Nick's chop about this. So we do it to each other, but it's
listen, if the Chargers win today, they're not in the playoff picture still. So I don't know.
I thought the Bengals would be. Don't they have 6 wins?
The Chargers would be tied. Well, there will be a 3-way tie at 6-4 for the 7th seed in the playoffs, or 4-way tie
between who? Cincinnati, the Chargers, and the Patriots,
and the Jets.
Okay,
well, 6-4. So they might be in the picture, but they're half a game out of the picture.
Yeah.
Which just proves my point that this stupid AFC is absolutely loaded. It is ridiculous.
It's loaded, but okay. Off the podcast conversation we had, Nick wants the NFL to rework the entire league and put
100%.
Nick wants the NFL to put half the AFC teams in the NFC. Kind of. Like just flip them. Rework the divisions. And my argument to him was the NFC was stacked about 5 years ago when they had the Seattle Seahawks who were good, the 49ers, the Rams, the Packers, the Saints. There's always an NFC East team that was kind of good. The Panthers are good. My point being, the AFC was trash and it was just Brady and the rest for a couple of years. And then Mahomes came alive. But my point being, there's always going to be a more stacked conference than the other. And right now it's just the AFC.
Here is my counter argument to that. And I'll give it real quick. I know I want to
That's fine. That's fine. I think it's a fun debate to have.
Okay, so let's look at 5 years from now. Where will the AFC and where will the NFC be?
But you can't predict that. You can't predict injuries and stuff like that.
Let's just look at the quarterbacks that we foresee having a long career. Patrick Mahomes. This is just the AFC. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson. There's 5.
Yep.
Probably 5 of the best 6 quarterbacks in the NFL at the moment.
Something like that.
That's just 5. Let's go over to the NFC. Who's the best young quarterback in the NFC? Jalen Hurts. Then who?
I mean, is Dak young?
He's I'm pretty sure he's somewhere between like 28 and 30. So you could say he's young. That's fine.
Right. It's probably Dak, Hurts.
Is Dak better than any of the other 5 over there?
No.
Okay. Then Kyler Murray.
No.
Okay. Is Jalen Hurts better than any of those 5?
If you told me to draft a team today, I think I would draft him over Lamar.
Okay. So maybe 1. So that's just the top 5 from
Mahomes, Allen, Herbert, and who was the other one? Lamar and Burrow.
Yeah.
I think you can make a case for Hurts and Burrow. But anyway, I see what you mean. Right?
Okay.
Or even Herbert. I'm a little anti-Herbert, but I get what you mean.
Okay. So let's go to a guy that you have been pretty high on this year. How about Tua, who's number 6?
He's been pretty good, but Tua didn't get good until this year when he got a receiver. What if Justin Fields? The rest of the teams because it's what if Justin Fields gets a trade from, I don't know, whoever? If he trades for, let's say the Raiders ship out Devontae Adams, right? And Devontae Adams goes to the Bears, and then Justin Fields is in the MVP conversation next year. So, okay. and of course, there's going to be drafts in the next few years. I totally understand your point, but the quarterback conversation can flip in 5 years when the NFC reloads their quarterbacks.
Okay, that's fair. So now let me just give a couple more. Let's go to the next tier of AFC quarterbacks.
Yep.
Well, I guess you could say he's above it. Deshaun Watson.
If he plays, I mean, honestly, I'm a Watson guy, but I can't give you a take on Deshaun Watson right now. I
don't think Trevor Lawrence is going to be a superstar.
No.
But he is going to. But a lot of people think he's going to be relevant for a while. And then you have Kenny Pickett, who had his best game of the year this week. I'm not saying that he's going to be a long-term answer. I'm just saying these are the young talents. Let me go to the NFC quarterbacks. So these are the NFC quarterbacks that are going to, if the playoffs started today, here's your starting quarterback for each of these teams going into it. Jalen Hurts, fine. Kirk Cousins probably won't be a starter within 3 to 4 years on that Vikings team. Geno Smith he's had a great year. Let's be honest. He's not going to be the QB
in the next year or two.
In 3 years. Tom Brady going to retire. Dak Prescott, there's a very good argument in 3 to 4 years that he's gone. Daniel Jones probably just saved his career this year. But you could argue that they were looking for a quarterback entirely up until then. And then Jimmy Garoppolo. You want to argue Trey Lance? Sure, he didn't look great. You want to dig a little bit deeper? Taylor Heineke, Marcus Mariota, Jared Goff. Then you have Aaron Rodgers, who will probably be gone in a few years. Kyler Murray, who we don't know if he'll be on the team. Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, Matthew Stafford, Baker Mayfield, and then Justin Fields is the last seed who might still have a job there.
Right.
My whole point being, you could very well argue that 9 of the best 11 future quarterbacks in the league 4 or 5 years from now are in the AFC, and you're never going to make superstars from them because they're not going to make the playoffs. Like, that's the whole argument for it. And the whole point is 10 years from now, when we look back at the NFL, we're going to watch a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo go to another Super Bowl or a guy like Kirk Cousins go to a Super Bowl when that really should be Joe Burrow versus Patrick Mahomes, or Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes, or Justin Herbert versus Lamar Jackson. And you'll never get to see that matchup in a Super Bowl because how the league's built.
I totally get that. But again, 5 years ago, if we had this conversation, the AFC is Tom Brady, Andrew Luck, who retired.
How far back you want to go?
Before Mahomes.
Pre-Mahomes?
It's Tom Brady, Alex Smith, and Andrew Luck.
Peyton Manning, Big Ben, still older veterans, but
that's what I'm saying. Like, Peyton Manning and Big Ben are Aaron Rodgers right now, and Stafford over there, and Brady. So I'm saying, like, the NFC was the better conference 5-6 years ago. It's just how the NFL goes.
The QB talent has never been as good as it is today in the NFL.
So I think the fix for this is probably, and this is a debate that we've had in the NBA as well. The West was loaded for so many years, and a guy like Damian Lillard wouldn't get in the playoffs. And on the Eastern side, you'd have like the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I think this is something that goes on in every sport. There's usually one conference that's a little bit more loaded. The only fix I could see is if you open up the wild card spots to any conference or any division, and the division winners you get in, and then the conference, and then there's 6 wild cards throughout the conferences. That's the only other way I see you fix this.
I think there's one very simple fix, which is just you swap the NFC East with the NFC West with the AFC West.
But then you're taking away years of rivalries and stuff like that. You could just flip them.
You can, because it's still the division. It's not like, like no one really. I mean, do people care that much about a Cowboys-Rams game that happens, 3 times every 4 years? Or, I mean, like, you keep your divisions the same. You're just swapping the division in which conference is in.
It's just something that's probably never going to be done.
It won't. Well, they'll probably will once they do an expansion. They'll restructure the divisions, but God knows when that's going to happen.
Alrighty,
anyway,
let's move on to Monday Night Football. We got some previews and projections for you for tonight. Cardinals against the 49ers. First off, Marquise Brown is out. He's not going to return tonight. As for Kyler Murray, your guess is as good as mine. His ESPN projection is right now 0. So, Nick, I'm going to give you a projection. If Kyler Murray plays tonight against the San Francisco 49ers, let's say it's Colt McCoy's projection. That's 14.5. Over under for Kyler Murray if he plays.
If he's playing, I'm giving him over 14.5. I think he'd probably finish in that 17-18 range. Like, I think that would be where the line would be at for him.
Okay.
But, yeah, yep. I mean, I think that would be a pretty achievable number.
Okay. If he is I'll agree with you. Now, if it's Colt McCoy at 14.5.
I would go with the under here.
I'll go with the under as well.
I think he played better last week, but this San Francisco defense is a lot better than that. Right?
This might be one of, if not the best defense in the league. This defense is excellent. I would love to see the Patriots or the Jets versus the Chiefs. So I would love to see that matchup.
Yeah.
How about Jimmy G at 15.3? That seems high.
I'll take the over here.
I'll take the under. That seems high to me. How about James Conner at 14.2? He's on my all bust team, so I don't think I could take the over.
I think for me, it would come down to who the quarterback is. Conner has always played better with non-mobile quarterbacks because, again, he gets the workload off of those checkdowns, and he has the high touchdown upside. So I think it would come down to the quarterback. If it's Kyler, I would say under. If it's Colt, I'll say over.
Okay. What about Christian McCaffrey, 19.2? The way that I feel about this is you kind of always have to take the over on him, but I don't love it.
Yeah, I feel the same way as you. I wouldn't be surprised if he hit the under just because Elijah Mitchell is going to be in that workload. He only had 12 points until he found a late touchdown last week. So it's very possible that he doesn't hit this over, but I do think you have to take the over with CMC.
How about DeAndre Hopkins at 17? He does have a hamstring injury. I think he's questionable, but I think he's supposed to play at least.
I'll take the over here. He just gets too much workload to turn that down.
If it's Kyler, I'll take the over. If it's Colt McCoy, I'll take the under. How about Rondale Moore at 11.9? This is actually I'm flipping myself here. If Colt McCoy is quarterback, I'm going over for Rondale Moore. If it's Kyler, I'm going under.
I completely agree. That's exactly what I was going to say.
All right. Deebo Samuel at 14.9.
Going with the under here. He's only finished inside the top 20 receivers at one time this season.
If McCaffrey goes over, Deebo doesn't. If McCaffrey goes under, Deebo goes over. That's how I'm going to do it. Brandon Ayuk at 11.7. I'm going the under. Too many mouths to feed.
Yep, same thing. I'm not going to try. I don't think you can trust Ayuk in any game this year unless some major piece goes down with an injury.
How about Trey McBride, the backup tight end for the Cardinals at 6.1?
I'm going to go with the over here. He didn't hit it last week, but Zach Ertz has gotten double-digit points in pretty much all of his games, so I can't imagine that they're not going to try and work the tight end the same way that they did use Ertz.
Yeah, I'll go with the over as well. How about George Kittle at 11.4? The Cardinals have given up the second most fantasy points to tight ends.
Yeah, that's an easy smash for me. I think he's going to finish as a tight end 1 or 2 on the week.
Okay, sounds good. All right, thank you guys for listening to our show. That was our Monday show to wrap up things for week 11. If you enjoyed it and you're listening on an audio streaming platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give us that 5-star rating and a review. If you were listening or watching on YouTube, please drop a like on this video, hit that subscribe button, share the links with your friends, with your league mates, share the love of the Primetime Fantasy Podcast. Next time you hear from us will be tomorrow, Waiver Wire Tuesday. The waiver wires are getting thin, but we're going to keep helping you out every week we can, for your fantasy leagues. Also, programming note, because of Thanksgiving, we do have families and stuff like that. We are changing the schedule this week. You're not going to get 4 shows. You're going to get 3 shows. Our Thursday show is going to be our biggest of the week. We're going to have a Thanksgiving preview, and then we're going to have a weekend preview as well. So our news will be a tiny, tiny bit outdated, but that's basically our big Friday show meshed in with Thanksgiving. So big show on Thursday, and then, of course, we'll have our live show on Sunday as well. So with that said, thank you guys for listening. Enjoy Monday Night Football, and get ready for Waiver Wire Tuesday. We'll talk to you tomorrow.